Hey guys, it's Mike. Welcome to this recorded presentation of 3 common diet mistakes. And you're watching this either because you attended a seminar and you're rewatching the presentation, or you're a client of mine seeing this for the first time. And obviously, we will have talked at least briefly about some of the common diet hurdles that you might have, but this will be a good recap for those who have heard it before. And if you're seeing this for the first time, I want you to let it frame the next 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 30 weeks, whatever it is that you intend on working on your diet. And hopefully this is a lifelong endeavor for you. But before you begin your nutrition program, I really want you to think about the future and what we're really trying to accomplish. And that is long-term sustainable health. And if you're falling into these 3 different categories that I have seen over the course of my career with clientele who have worked out and who haven't worked out so well, these are 3 common diet mistakes that I see most often. All right, so to go over my qualifications, you may already know this, but I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, which means I am a nutrition coach with really cool friends. I operate under a medical director board that allows me access to different types of lab work to investigate chronic health problems. Oftentimes I work in tandem with medical professionals, with people who have health conditions that, is over my head. I do not treat health conditions. I do not diagnose health conditions. I don't ever work specifically on health conditions, but there are a lot of underlying causes for chronic health problems, nutritionally speaking. And one of those is blood sugar. Some of it's digestion. A lot of it can be helped with nutrition to a degree. And that doesn't mean if you have a health condition, if you don't have a health condition, you can't work with me. It just means that I can help support to a degree. Certified metabolic fitness practitioner, that means that I have training in the biochemistry of nutrition with an emphasis on glucose regulation, which is blood sugar. I'm also Flex Diet certified, which is a fancy way to say the Flex Diet program is really all about creating metabolic flexibility, which is another fancy term for saying you are able to tolerate a wide variety of foods rather than narrow. People that are less healthy tend to tolerate less variety of foods and so on and so forth. So we'll get further into that at some other point. But those are just some qualifications. Also, another qualification I have is that I've been through the process of fat loss and life transformation on the left. If you haven't seen my fat picture, there it is, 2005. I was about 220 pounds in that picture, nice and jolly, but not super happy about the way that I looked. I was a former baseball player, and I kind of let myself go and decided to make the life change for myself. I swiped the credit card. I hired a personal trainer, and that's actually what led me into the career field that I'm in right now. And on the right, it's a little shot of my backyard. As you know, I'm a bit of a fitness junkie. I'm a bit of a believer in building a home that is conducive to movement, a good environment that encourages health. And so I have a pull-up bar and some parallel bars. My kids love playing around on it. On the left is Braden. Luca is sitting there by the kettlebell. I'm sure was about to lift it until the camera went off and got his attention. So that's a little bit about me. I have the experience educationally, and I have the experience personally to help lead you through this journey. Common diet mistakes. Feel free to email me or tell me in person, what are your biggest diet hurdles? Your particular hurdles may or may not be covered in this one, but I think there's 3 common ones that I see over and over again, and all 3 may resonate with you. I may be preaching to the choir on these, but we're going to dive into that a little bit. But I do want to know, what are your biggest hurdles? And we're better off individualizing from here. But these are 3 areas where you will definitely need to pay attention to. Number 1, eating too many or too few calories. Number 2, too much starchy carbohydrates and processed food. And 3, not sleeping enough. I feel like a lot of people are very familiar with the starchy carbohydrate picture. Let me get my pen here. Carbohydrates have gotten kind of a bad rap over the last few years. Carbohydrates are not dangerous, but starchy carbohydrates in high consumption is very easy to find, or in high quantities, very easy to find in our culture. A lot of foods that you'll see are carbohydrate rich, protein deficient, and therefore could start some blood sugar issues going forward. If you're out of shape, gained a bunch of weight, chances are you've been eating the standard American diet, which is very carbohydrate rich, and also processed food rich, meaning the natural food has been altered to a degree, or additives have been added to it, food dyes, sugar, artificial sweeteners, or it's a completely altered food product altogether. Chickens don't have nuggets. Okay, that's a processed form of meat. There are no such things as a fruit roll-up tree. So, fruit roll-ups are an example, completely fabricated food. If your diet has been rich in processed foods, there's a good chance that's a common denominator in your diet. And then not sleeping enough. This third one gets skipped over by a lot of people, and I don't think many people appreciate sleep for what it is, and it has a tremendous effect on your health and your willpower and your hormones. So on the back end of things, sleep is incredibly important. Calories. I think in our culture, we've been told over and over again to watch your calories, meaning don't let them go too high. But in reality, I've seen a lot of people come in my doors and sit down in consults with me that are eating way too few calories to maintain their health. And I have this little graphic here to show you kind of the tipping scale. Malnutrition on the left means not enough nutrition, which means immunosuppression, means your immune system cannot function properly, and susceptibility to infection. Not to mention, you could have headaches, ringing in ears. You could lose muscle mass, which is extraordinarily important, especially as we age. On the right side, we have overnutrition, which most people are already afraid of. Immunoactivation means a hypersensitive immune system, a susceptibility to inflammatory disease. Fatty liver disease is an example of that. Inflammation throughout the body, redness, swelling, maybe hypersensitivity to allergies. There's a lot of things that can happen, and of course fat gain. There's a lot of things that can happen from eating way too many calories, but I think as a society, we're a little more familiar with the dangers of too many calories versus too few, and we have to be very careful of that. So in the middle, of course, is normal immune function and optimal nutrition, which means our body's operating completely normally. So why do people struggle with this? And to a degree, I believe that it's not your fault. We are responsible for our own actions, but we must be very aware of what the food industry actually looks like nowadays versus what it used to. And human beings, I don't believe, are very well equipped to handle the food industry and food environment that we're in right now. On the left-hand side, this graphic here, let me back up a little bit. The graphic here is titled The Environmental Mismatch, which means human beings in their environment are matched to a degree to use their instincts, their awareness, and be able to search for food in a certain way. We have a mismatch when it comes to both food and with movement and exercise. Food used to be, meaning prior to the industrial era, labor-intensive and natural. So the most processed food you might come across would be bread. But bread back then might have 5 ingredients, typical to what you would see in the Mediterranean today, not chock full of additives and extremely processed. And it was very labor intensive, meaning you had to grow it, you had to farm it, or somebody else had to. And even 150 years ago, over 50% of Americans used to live on farms, and now it's less than 2%. Food is a lot less labor intensive to grow or to get. It's typically just a stroll or a car ride away, easy to swipe the card and just bring a ton of food home. And so that reduces our overall movement capacity or labor to get food. And now even preparing it is much easier. We just pop it in the microwave. A lot of times food-like products take 30 seconds to a minute and a half, maybe 3 minutes, rather than taking 2 to 3 hours to cook. Now it's very convenient and then hyper palatable, which means these processed foods are designed through perfect salt and sugar and additive combinations to make your brain prefer it over natural options. A lot of companies have spent a lot of money to make sure that this food is extraordinarily flavorful to where you can't just eat one, where natural foods don't necessarily have that ping or that super flavorful component to it, especially when you're eating processed foods all the time. Movement, the same way. Movement used to be easy to come by because everything was very laborious, high in variation. And then now is much less necessary when our jobs are much more technology-based. and in low variance and in controlled environment, meaning typically we walk in a very controlled environment, a lot less stuff on the floor. We don't have rocks to step over. We don't have branches to step on or move around. Typically everything we do is in a straightforward fashion or sitting in a chair. And a lot of buildings are, designed to be as safe as possible. So we just aren't that challenged when it comes to our movement unless we go out of our way to do it in a gym. So we could see where there's a metabolic problem when food is now super convenient, no longer difficult to find. We don't have to hunt for it. We don't have to prepare it by a long shot. We just pop it in the microwave. And for most people, movement is a lot harder to come by, meaning we have to go find a gym. We have to go find a gym or an exercise program in order to get enough labor in our day to maintain health. So this is a big problem. If you look at the graphic on the right, we see the typical scene in a grocery store where everything is very cleverly advertised, bright colors. A lot of this food is commoditized, processed food, usually high sugar, a lot of additives, which can have a detrimental effect on our health. And if this is the bulk of our diet, especially these are breakfast options here where most people start their morning off with it, you could have a lot of sugar, a lot of processed ingredients affecting your health early in the morning. And I don't think these companies are evil. I think they are just really, really good. They understand that the human brain, based on this last slide, if you look at food used to be labor intensive and now it's convenient, that sounds like a really good idea to a human being. If our instincts are always to find the most flavorful and least labor intensive thing we can find, which used to mean it would be easier to prepare. It would take maybe 2.5 hours instead of 3. According to our genes, food that tastes good usually means it won't kill you, means it has a nutrient profile to it. Now, the most flavorful and convenient items are these. The food environment has completely changed, and the fact that you can go an entire year and not eat a natural food and all of the stuff tastes great and it's cheap and it's cleverly labeled and it's has beautiful colors. Of course, the human brain prefers that. And that's the bulk of our options in a grocery store. So on one hand, a lot of our options are pure crap and they scream, buy me. I don't believe that these companies are evil. I just think they're really, really good at what they do. And we have to be aware of that. If we want to dig ourselves out of this hole, we have to be aware of how food's being marketed to us and what these options really mean to us. On the left, another component to our struggles is that Americans now spend a lot less on food than we used to. So 1960, about 14% of the average American's income was allocated towards food. And now, right about, 2013, we're estimated anywhere between 6 and 8% of our food. I think it's a little higher now, maybe closer to 10% of our annual budgets are allocated towards food. So regardless of your total income, we need to be looking at how much you are allocating toward your food as well. Some people struggle simply because they prioritize spending their money on other things rather than higher quality food. So instead of thinking in terms of our ancestors, which was, let me find food, let me find shelter, let me take care of all of the necessities, and then whatever money we have left over, we'll spend on other things. On average, most people look at food as an afterthought or maybe an inconvenience. And this may not be you specifically, but I would highly encourage you to look at your budget and see how much wiggle room you're really giving to yourself. I think a lot of people struggle with food when they say that good food is a little too expensive for me, or I don't know how to afford better food. On one hand, it's much easier to reduce your expenses than it is to increase your income. If you don't have much wiggle room in your income and you're spending only 6 to 8% of your food, of money on food, I would really like to see us get onto more of a worldwide average, which is 14 to 18% range over here, and look at if you really have a health problem that you're dealing with and you really need to improve your diet, or you don't have a health problem, you want to avoid them in the future and you want to improve your diet. If you want to afford better food, you're much better off looking at your budget and trying to increase the amount of percentage that you spend towards a better diet than on other things like shoes, clothes, cable, things that are non-necessities, things you may really, really like, but you do have the ability to pull some budget away from these things. Maybe eating out at restaurants is soaking up a lot of your budget rather than buying food for home. This is something we really need to look at. How much of your resources currently are you allocating towards something as important as food? And then when you're in the grocery store, and anywhere for that matter, we're constantly being marketed to. Aside from clever looking boxes that attract you to buy them, we also have tons of options. And I don't know where I heard this stat, but it's close to somewhere between the average person is exposed to somewhere between 10,000 and 13,000 advertisements in a day. And that includes bumper stickers, billboards, TV commercials, internet ads, T-shirts, everything that you pass that advertises a business or some sort of service on it is considered an advertisement. And after a certain amount of advertising, after a certain amount of decisions throughout an entire day, you only have so much willpower to give. And you may not even think about them as decisions, but we're still making a decision when we see a bus stop bench with an attorney's face on it that is asking you to call him and hire him as an attorney. You may not think of it as much of a decision, but in your mind, it's still a no. You look at it and decide no. And maybe you look up at a billboard and it advertises a restaurant and you think yes or no. You kind of make a subliminal, subtle decision every time you see some kind of marketing. After we subject ourselves to so much of that during a day, now maybe add multitasking onto your day at work. You're having a conversation on speakerphone while shopping on Amazon. You may absolutely be just pummeling your brain throughout the day. And after a certain amount of decisions throughout the day, your willpower is constantly dwindled, which is one of the reasons why the snacks are at the cash register of a restaurant. The snacks are at the cash register of a grocery store. They send you through this maze of all of these items. And depending on your personal, budgetary scenario, you may be making a lot of decisions throughout that entire grocery store. By the time you get to the end where you're at the cash register and waiting, your willpower has been drained. And so you have the nice, flavorful candy where they're waiting for you to make a decision about them too. So we have to be aware of how much marketing we're subjecting ourselves to and reducing the amount of unnecessary decisions we might be making throughout a day. So one of the sneaky little stress management tools that we use is, when you go in the grocery store, bring a list so you're not making decisions throughout the day. And then also try to avoid unnecessary multitasking throughout the day. You're just asking for a binge night of ice cream later on in the day if you are stressing yourself out over small things. Now, there's some stressors you're not going to be able to get rid of, but if you really want to look on the back end of this thing, and if you're trying to avoid cravings and unnecessary snacking, stress is one place we can look. And then also in the grocery store, if you need to try to avoid impulse buying, bring a list, get headphones. If you see people, sometimes you'll see people wearing headphones in the grocery store. That's exactly what they're trying to avoid, impulse buying. They're trying to stay on task, not get distracted, and keep it moving. The fast food industry spent $4.6 billion in advertising in 2012. Meaning every other commercial that you see is likely a fast food or junk food commercial, as opposed to $116 million was spent on advertising for fruits and vegetables. It's absolutely ridiculous for most people to think about seeing an asparagus commercial. Like, you will never, ever see it. It just doesn't make for good advertising versus the triple bacon burger at so-and-so restaurant. So we're constantly being advertised, not just in general, but we're also being advertised way more of the junk food than the good stuff. So if you're constantly seeing that on a regular basis, say you're a little bit stressed out at work and you have 30 minutes to eat, what's the first thing you're going to think of? Whatever has been advertised to you the most. So as long as, again, I don't consider these companies evil. Their job is to make money. Your job is to make money, but you have to be aware of the reasons behind the decisions we make. And this is a nice little graphic of all of the quote-unquote options that we have to buy, which are really just a product of, I think, 8 different companies. Kraft, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, you can see all of them here. make a boatload of the foods that we make. And so a lot of these are also corn, soy, and wheat based. A lot of them are commoditized foods. There's a very good chance that you're eating or drinking products that are on here, including some of the other foods. Again, this isn't evil, but you need to understand why it's so difficult to break away from this type of a system when it's everywhere. There's a lot of money behind it. These are the guys who can afford most of the commercial time, and so you're much more likely to buy those types of foods just based on the law of numbers. Because of this industrial push, it becomes important that we actually pay attention to how much and what we eat. As much as we would like to believe that the whole eat in moderation idea works, in this food environment, I would argue that point greatly. If we moderate the food aisles that we have today, we are going to become very sick individuals. We need to understand these companies to a greater degree because we know they have a plan, and it's a very sophisticated plan, and we better have a plan as well. So this is part of your plan. How many calories should you eat? Okay, we know that there could be too many and too few. An average 150-pound person walking 4 miles an hour can burn 5 to 6 calories per minute or 340 calories per hour. So just a little bit of activity can also boost your calorie needs. The average person eating to their dietary requirements may eat 4 pounds of food per day. Competitive athletes, on the other hand, can expend between 1,000 to 2,500 calories per day. And that would put you somewhere on the 8 to 10 pounds of food per day and 3,000 to 5,000 calories. The reason I point this out is you may need to drastically improve your calorie intake or increase your calorie intake if you are exercising regularly. Too few calories slows the immune system down. You can't produce energy the way you want to. Liver slows down. You could lose muscle tissue. Slow thinking, like the cloudy brain kind of thing. Poor mood and low sex hormones, specifically testosterone and estrogen. Also can slow down the thyroid as well. Too many calories, fat storage, hyperimmune system like we saw, fatty liver, visceral fat, meaning visceral fat is like fat around the organs. Cloudy thinking, you could feel lethargic, and then a cortisol response, which is a stress hormone. So finding the right calorie zone for you. Calorie estimating is really on a highly individual basis. So take this with as a starter kit. You may need to tweak from here. But depending on your goal depends on how many calories you should eat overall. And the 3 categories that I've split this into is weight loss, maintenance, and weight gain. So some of you may be looking to lose weight. Some of you just might be looking to maintain the weight that you have. And then some of you might be looking to actually gain weight. Some of you that are powerlifting or in some kind of sport and you need to gain weight. If you're somebody who wants to just gain muscle, you might want to look in that category. And then it's also broken into 3 different categories of activity. One is sedentary, meaning you don't necessarily exercise. You could maybe walk. Moderately active, 3 to 4 times a week exercise, weightlifting. And then very active, 5 to 7 times per week, weightlifting or conditioning. So your job now is to pause this presentation and do a little number crunching. Take your body weight and get a high-low of your calorie intakes. When I say high-low, if you're a 100-pound person and you multiply 100 times 10, that would equal 1,000 calories. That would be your low end. That same person could also do 100 times 12, which is 1,200 calories. So your calorie range would be anywhere between 1,000 and 1,200. I highly doubt there's any 100-pound people in this group, but if you are, then those are your calorie ranges. If you want to maintain, you would do 12 to 14. If you want to gain weight and you're sedentary, then you do 16 to 18. So pick the category that fits you best, pause the presentation, and go through the numbers. And the next topic is carbohydrates. And I believe that most people have an opinion on carbohydrates by now. and I don't want to say that they're all wrong, but carbohydrates might be the most highly varied or individualistic categories of macronutrients between fats, carbs, and protein. So the reason being is there's a lot of studies coming out. This one stood out to me greatly, and it is called Personalized Nutrition by Prediction of Glycemic Response, which is your blood sugar's response to meals. And here's a little quote from this study that I think really sticks out. It speaks to the notion that individualized nutrition is where we are going with this whole thing. It's very unlikely we're going to find that you respond the same way as your friend to a particular diet. I know a lot of people are similar in dietary needs, but especially speaking to the subject of carbohydrates, most people have high variability in their response. And here they found that. Here we continuously monitored week-long glucose levels in an 800-person cohort, measured responses to 46,898 meals, and found a high variability in the response to identical meals, suggesting that universal dietary recommendations may have limited utility. And that is from Cell.com. So on the graphic here on the right, you'll notice that participant 445 had a blood sugar spike with a banana and was fed a cookie at a different time, which is typically considered junk food, did not spike their blood sugar to the cookie. Okay, and we know that we all hate this person. They can eat a cookie and their blood sugar doesn't spike. Now, I'm not saying this person should eat cookies, but as far as blood sugar goes, they did not cause a glucose response, a high glucose response. And so this other person, though, compared to participant 644, they had exactly the opposite response. They did have a blood sugar spike to the to the cookie, but not to the banana, showing that two people could have completely opposite reactions to identical foods. So when it comes to carbohydrates, you might have a totally different reaction to sweet potatoes than I do, maybe oatmeal. As a matter of fact, I was working with a client recently, and we found out that sweet potatoes, which is really high on my list of carb sources you should eat, typically, she had a big blood sugar spike on a regular basis with sweet potatoes and not to oatmeal. So as we were going through her blood sugar regulation program, we found out what types of carbohydrates she actually did tolerate and which ones she didn't. It's really valuable information. But the point is, with carbohydrates, it can be very highly individualized. So this takes a little bit of testing. Correlating carbohydrates and health. So this study, published in August 2017, said that high carbohydrate intake was associated with higher risk of total mortality, whereas total fat and individual types of fat were related to lower total mortality. So carbohydrates are a big factor in our health. And again, this doesn't necessarily lump all vegetables into the same category, but typically when you get to first world countries, we just have an abundance of carbohydrates, and then typically processed carbohydrates. So I would really highly encourage you to test different types of carbohydrate intakes for yourself, see which ones spike your blood sugar, which we'll get to that in a minute on how to test for that, and really try your best to avoid processed carbohydrates. It really does not do us a whole lot of good. Testing blood glucose. So rather than worrying about total overall intake right now, I have more information on that in another presentation, but if you really want to test what carbohydrates are spiking your blood sugar, I highly encourage you to take this test. So a glucose monitor could be anywhere between $20, and it allows you to actually test your blood sugar response to different foods as well as your fasting blood sugar. And why does blood sugar matter? Chronically elevated blood glucose levels is one of the earliest predictors of metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is kind of this state where you're starting to become very unhealthy, and different health conditions can come from that, but a lot of belly fat, lethargy, a lot of different problems that come from metabolic syndrome. But when you're in that space where you just feel really, really unhealthy, but you don't have a diagnosable health condition, typically that's categorized as metabolic syndrome. So testing your blood sugar can be one of the best ways to test your diet and make sure that it is actually helping your blood sugar normalize. It's really easy to do. I know people get a little funny about pricking themselves, but you really get used to it. It's not that big a deal. And again, if you want to cut all of the guesswork out and really get to the bottom of what your diet should look like, a good diet typically balances your blood sugar. Okay. So whatever advice you're getting from your magazines, or you're getting from me, or you're getting from anyone, this kind of takes all the guesswork out and really tells you what works for you and what doesn't. And it's absolutely a fantastic way to do things, in my opinion. The first step is to take your fasted glucose early in the morning, and which is right when you wake up. So before you get any meals in, before you get stressed out, before you go do anything, take your blood sugar. Healthy range is anywhere between 80 and 90 is optimal, but considered by the Mayo Clinic, these ranges, 80 to 100 is healthy. If your fasted blood glucose is in the 100 to 125 range, you're considered pre-diabetic. Diabetic is over 126, fasted early in the morning. So testing protocol is take it early in the morning, eat 50 grams of effective carbs early, first thing when you wake up. When I say 50 grams of effective carbs, that means, look up the nutrient content of a certain food, say sweet potatoes, and eat 50 grams of carbohydrates right then and there. And after, take your blood glucose 2 hours later. Typically, a really good choice would be to take it 30 minutes, 1 hour, and 2 hours afterwards and see what the arc of your blood sugar looks like. So you get to see the way that your insulin responds and your blood sugar responds to certain foods. If you're under 115, 2 hours later, that food is probably okay. And this is an example of what 50 grams of effective carbs would look like. White rice, you can test about 1.14 cups. Brown rice is about 1.03. White potato is about 2 cups to get 50 grams of effective carbs. Sweet potato is about 1.5. Butternut squash, about 3.5. Carrots would be about 5.8 cups, and banana, 1.1 cups. So you know that these don't all measure out exactly the same. To get 50 grams of carbohydrates, you would need different quantities. So keep this chart handy, and you can start your 7-day carb test that way. So the third most common diet mistake is not paying enough attention to your sleep. If you're getting inadequate sleep, it has a tremendous downstream effect on willpower, the way you perceive everything. We just mentioned how much marketing we're up against, and how many advertisements you might be up in a day. And not only does sleep affect your willpower, it can also affect your cravings throughout the day and all kinds of hormone swings. So let's take a look at some of those slides. The National Sleep Foundation found that the average sleep duration for Americans fell over 3 hours in a 50-year time span. 1 million people reported an 8 to 8.9 hours of sleep per night on average. By the 2000s, the average had fallen to roughly 7 hours a night. Today, many people report only 5 to 6 hours of sleep per night. So our society has decided that we're not going to go to bed for 8 to 9 hours a night. We're going to take more about 5 to 6, and it's having a huge downstream effect on our health. So this was a study done on sleep deprivation's effect on the hormone leptin. Leptin is a signaler between our gut and our brain on basically, it tells our brain when we're hungry. It shows here, now my graphics are they came out a little funny, so I hope you notice the column on the left shows the amount of leptin found in the bloodstream, and the row below is basically the time that they monitored leptin levels. So after 4 hours in bed, you see that leptin levels crept from about just above 1.8, maybe 1.9, to peaked at 3.6, and then curtailed down over the course of the rest of the day for 24 hours. The graphic on the right shows subjects who slept an entire 12 hours in bed, and they were right around or just above 3 nanograms per milliliter almost twice as much leptin in their bloodstream and peaked close to 6, and then curtailed back down to normal, which was just above 3. So we have a higher leptin response to better sleep. And leptin basically, again, signals the brain when you are hungry and when you are not. So this ultimately means that better sleep gives us better appetite signaling, and less sleep gives us worse appetite signaling. So when you do not have adequate sleep, you might be at work and getting all kinds of craving signals and signals that tell your brain that you're hungry when you really are not. So it affects our craving system. Also, this graphic in a similar fashion shows that the thyroid gets affected, which is basically your thermostat for your body. It helps control your metabolism. And on the left-hand side, we had very similar results as the leptin test. Now, the graphic on the left again shows just about 50% thyroid function after 4 hours of bed as compared to 12 hours in bed. So the thyroid definitely gets punished by low sleep. It definitely slows down metabolism and your body to convert energy and your body's ability to function properly. All in all, sleep tremendously affects your thyroid function. It drains your willpower, and it can increase cravings and ultimately your weight. It's incredibly important that we pay attention to our sleep. So here's 5 easy steps to better nutrition. Number 1, figure out calorie intake. We should have that close to estimated right now. Number 2, shop the perimeter of the grocery store to help eliminate processed foods. 3, sleep 7 to 9 hours, non-negotiable. 4, prepare meals ahead of time. Make sure they are protein rich, generally 4 to 6 ounces. The prepare meals ahead of time point is also to the effect of willpower. If stress is going to hit you, and we're in this food market that is very, very tempting, if you already have food available to you and already made, it also checks that box of being very convenient, which is what a lot of us need these days. That's just kind of the way it is. But if you make sure that you have really good food that's convenient, already prepared for you, it makes decision making a lot easier, and you're not kind of held feet to the fire on impulse buying. And number 5, get a glucometer. I can't tell you how important this is. I really think it's a step that we need to take. If I could trade everyone's scale for a glucometer, I 100% would. I think it really helps you figure out what works for you versus everybody else. And you don't have to pay attention to clever marketing anymore, and you don't have to be subject to the next fad diet. Really find out what really works for you. If you're doing a keto diet, or we're working on more of a keto-esque type of approach, get ketone strips if you're doing it, and test your ketones as you go, because that should be optimized if you're doing a ketone diet. And so that's what I have. I really hope you got something out of this. Of course, if I've already worked on your macros with you, you might have a little bit different count, maybe something that's a little more accurate. But again, the calorie estimator is a good place to start. If I'm not working with you specifically, it's a good place to get your estimations down. And then if you need more help, feel free to get any one of these guides. Me and Michelle Richards have a Kickstart guide on ResultCult.com, Relieve Stress Through Qualitative and Diet Movement. You get that just for signing up for our email list. I have a handbook available on ResultCult.com called Heal and Thrive. That'll help walk you through more of the steps. And then Balance Stress is our Monster award-winning ebook, where you get to really understand how stress affects diet, movement, and your brain. So thank you for joining, and send any questions to Mike at CoachMikeRitter.com. Thanks again, and I will see you soon.